and we want to ask a few questions. The first one is, why is empirical validation important? I already mentioned that empirical validation is very important for the derived structures if you like to use them for assessment and for teaching and learning, because an adaptive system which adapts to the student, to his answers, for instance, only can work efficiently and correctly if the underlying structures are empirically valid. So that means you have to make sure, before you use the structures which you derive by the methods I tried to explain briefly, before you use these structures in your e-learning system for assessing or for teaching, you have to make sure that they are empirically valid. Otherwise, you run into problems. So the question is, what is the basis for empirical validation? The basis for empirical validation, of course, are the theoretical constructs which are used for the adaptivity. So on the one side, as you remember, we have the prerequisite relation, which can be the basis for empirical validation, and on the other side we have the knowledge space or performance space, which can be used for empirical validation. And you can derive some consequences of these two mathematical objects for empirical validation. And the main aspect for empirical validation is that you need to have a structure. If all the problems are independent, then there is no structure. The whole power set can be observed, for instance, if you take the knowledge structure as the basis for empirical validation. If you have no structure, empirical validation is not possible. So you have to make sure that you create first the structure. If every knowledge state, every combination of solved problems is possible, then of course you cannot use the knowledge space or the knowledge structure or the performance structure for empirical validation. So the structure makes possible that you have the empirical validation either by the prerequisite relation or by the knowledge structure. So question is, if you have the structure as the basis, what is the general procedure? This depends, of course, whether you go via the prerequisite relation or if you go via the knowledge space. In case of the knowledge space, you easily can imagine, and this is the more general approach, or more often used approach, you easily can imagine that only those knowledge states which are in the knowledge structure should be observed in reality. Those states which are not elements in the structure should not be observed in reality. Of course, you have the problem of lucky guesses and careless errors. So it might be that sometimes you observe an answer pattern which does not correspond to the states in the knowledge structure. And of course, you need to have some criterion whether or not an answer pattern corresponds to the knowledge structure or not. And if you like to compare the answer pattern with the states in the knowledge structure, usually you use what is called symmetrical set difference. So symmetrical set difference. You compare the set of solved problems of a student with all the sets of the knowledge structure by computing the set difference. And of course, this set difference should be small for empirically valid knowledge structures. What are the methodological obstacles and challenges? The most important challenge is that the size, the cardinality of the knowledge structure influences the result of empirical validation. I already told you, if you have the whole power set, every answer pattern can be observed and is in accordance with the power set. So there is no chance to, to validate empirically the power set. It's a priori valid. The more the domain is structured, the less large is the number of knowledge states, and the more you have the problem that only those states should be observed which are elements in the structure. So that means your challenge is increasing with large structure. Challenge to validate. On the other side, you like to have a strong structure because this makes assessment more efficiently. So there's the problem how to take into account the size, the cardinality of the knowledge structure, the knowledge space or performance space in empirical validation, and there are some methods how to do this. Next and last question is, are examples for good practices available? If you like to go into this field, of course, good examples are necessary. It's not enough just to have the more or less theoretical basic ideas and to know about them. You also have to check the correspondence examples which guide you in using these methods yourself. And there are good examples for good practice, and you easily can find them via the homepage of my group, and that's the URL of the homepage, and I invite you to visit the homepage and to try to find these examples of good practices. Of course, these examples are published, and not all of the publications are good examples, because many of them are regarding other topics and content. However, there are good publications which are easy to understand. So I still have 2 minutes, and I would like to, because I was asked, at least for the master student, to ask for homework, I would like to give you a few not so difficult tasks for your homework. So now only the master students are involved, and the first question to you is, try to find the exact definitions of the properties of prerequisite relation and quasi-ordinal knowledge space. The properties of, say it in other words, of a mathematical object called partial order and the mathematical object called lattice. Probably I will send to the master students an email to make the questions clear, so it's not necessary just now to write down. I just want to give you an impression what is expected to you. I told you about these 2 times 2 matrix, and that the frequency in these 4 cells may indicate whether or not a pair of problems is in the prerequisite relation. So the question is, why and which of these cells is relevant or can be used to indicate whether or not a pair of problems is element in the prerequisite relation. And the last question is also very simple. Try to find out the exact definition of symmetric set distance. So more or less the first, second, and fourth question can be answered by searching in the internet. The third question can be answered only by thinking. And thinking, of course, is most important for learning. So I hope very much that I was able to motivate you to think about knowledge spaces and what's around them. And I hope you will become in favor of this approach and use it for your own research and development. Thank you very much for your kind attention.